Like it! Necromorphs Scourge continues to wreak havoc throughout the universe, but it's all coming to a head in Dead Space 3. Outwardly, the franchise is survival horror and hard science fiction housed in a foreboding atmosphere, but much of the series is focused on the solitary turmoil of protagonist Clarke. Well, this time he's not alone, teaming up with hardened soldier John Carver and packing some new mechanics to end the outbreak once and for all. This final chapter of Isaac's story is a sprawling, action-packed epic, but at the expense of some of the quiet terror patented by the franchise. Yet, when it all comes to a close, it's easy to see that this is the best game of the series. Clarke is down in the dumps after destroying a marker responsible for a necromorph outbreak. He's forced back into the fray after his one-time girlfriend Ellie, who we met in the second game, disappears off the grid, and her military boyfriend and his subordinate John Carver forcibly coerce Isaac to find her. Soon enough, he's the target of a militarized group of marker-worshipping unitologists led by the single-minded Danik. Isaac's race to end the outbreak leads him to the frozen planet of Tau Volantis, where the true secret to stopping everything is supposedly hidden. It moves along at a breakneck pace, and some inconsistencies in the plot that aren't explained are told in tie-in comics and other games in the franchise, which can dampen what should be an easy-to-understand story point. There's a primer for new players to catch up on what happened in the previous games, but it's generally easy enough to follow and will keep you glued to your seat throughout the entire experience. Isaac's evolution from silent engineer and determined soldier culminate here beautifully to true hero. It's great to watch a character confidently evolve over the course of a few games, and the briskly paced campaign allows for little breathing room, though it does lose a little bit of focus in the last 6 chapters before ramping back up amazingly well. It's hard to put down, not least because Dead Space 3 is so much fun to play. Dead Space 3 eschews the blood-soaked corridors that dominated the previous games in favour of spending a majority of its long trudge outdoors. The first third of the game shifts you briskly between station settlements and spaceships before finally settling on the frozen hell of Tau Volantis, where you'll fight off necromorph infestations and gun-toting zealots while navigating its expansive environments. The shift will disappoint series veterans who prefer the relentless dark of its predecessors, since Game 3 keeps proceedings running in top gear for long stretches of time. There's the usual lull in between the frenzied dismemberment that hallmarks the experience, but the scares are nowhere near as impactful as the series is capable of producing. The removal of manual save points eliminates the need to tiptoe around every corner when checkpoints auto-save your progress, and the inclusion of co-op comforts what usually excels as a solitary nightmare. This deficit is compensated by the swarms of enemies that blanket every encounter to lend the same sense of urgency and self-preservation. It's more appropriate to class Dead Space 3 as an edge-of-your-seat thriller than as a terrifying horror game, and in this respect, it is all class. Strategic dismemberment returns in all its visceral glory as you'll utilise it indoors, outdoors, and in zero gravity. Aside from firearms, you're given the added abilities of using stasis to temporarily slow enemy movements and telekinesis to launch deadly projectiles into them. The puzzles and mini-games return in heavy rotation throughout the campaign, as does hacking feed boxes and collecting text logs and audio recordings that count towards your completion progress. The game perks up considerably once you go planet-side, where you're given free reign in the sandbox environment to go on side missions to attain resource caches and unlock hidden story secrets. There's an awful lot of backtracking that's done well for the most part, but it begins to grate as the final few hours of the 12 to 15 hour campaign play out. For the first time in the franchise, Dead Space 3 includes the option to play the campaign cooperatively, with the second player filling the shoes of John Carver from beginning to end. It's integrated seamlessly with no compromise affecting either the solo or co-op experience, and the drop-in drop-out function allows you to join friends' games with your current inventory to lend them a hand and advance your own. Several side missions that centre around Carver's haunted personal life are also very clever, and to elaborate on them further would spoil the surprise for eager co-op gamers looking for an experience unique to each player. Also debuting is the weapon and inventory crafting system, a redesign of the workbench from the first 2 games and the biggest draw to replay the game with friends, yourself, or anyone who's on offer. Throughout the game, you cultivate raw materials from enemy corpses, crates, and hidden stashes that are used to craft ammo, medkits, and other items in your inventory. There are also key components such as gun frames and other mechanical parts to design your own weapons, and you use your resources to determine those specific attributes and support attachments, as well as upgrading their stats, rate of fire, damage, clip size, and reload time. You can use blueprints to quickly make stock weapons or custom make your own through the mix and match experimentation and save the design in the blueprints folder. Players in co-op can also trade their own blueprint designs to one another to show off their ideal loadouts, and the whole scenario is tailor-made to work to your own strengths. Finding the required materials is also aided through using scavenger bots that you deploy in resource-rich areas using a built-in radar detection system, though the need to purchase paid downloadable upgrades for them to hold more materials or return to a workbench faster, for example, feels like a pretty much blatant cash grab. Dead Space 3 isn't a major step up from its predecessor in terms of visual horsepower, but the sheer scope and breadth of the adventure is a quantum leap, as the campaign is littered with dozens of enormous locations and sprawling vistas. Its mostly dulled colour palette erupts with bursts of light and dark all across the experience to keep it from feeling stale, yet suitably Dead Space. Character models are excellent and expressive enough that you'll feel the right emotions when you need to and grunt when you don't, but they're all excellently voiced and feel mostly three-dimensional. The sound design is extraordinary as always, evoking the right level of dread when appropriate and blasting out the speakers when the action ramps up, but some familiar cues diminish the jump out of your chair surprise the developers were going for. For all intents and purposes, it is one excellent audiovisual experience. All great stories come in threes, and the old axiom couldn't be more rightfully applied to Dead Space 3. The game is bursting with hours upon hours of terrific solo and co-op gameplay, challenging enemies, a variety of creepy environments, and one of the deepest crafting suites in action gaming. It's a shame it's at the cost of much of the subtlety that made the previous entries so memorable, and the pacing falters a little bit in the game's final third. Yet, much like The Lord of the Rings The Return of the King or Gears of War 3, this final installment may not be some people's personal favourites, but Dead Space 3 is the jewel in the crown of an amazing trilogy. Even if you play the first two games before you get to this one, this near-perfect threequel will be worth the hours of catch-up to close out one of the finest survival horror series of all time. If you haven't played a Dead Space game yet, why?